The hum of the subways entranced Theory during his morning ride to work. He found himself caught in a staring fit, counting the flashes of light against the glass, almost as if he were making another sacrifice. His hands twitched as he fiddled with his fingers and thought over some puzzle in his head, a logic knot, as Aidan often called it. The difficulty of his puzzle was reflected on his face as he contorted his mouth and eyebrows as he maneuvered towards his solutions. Theory muttered softly to himself, drawing the attention of an old lady sitting in the seat in front of him. The car was pretty scarcely seated, so that when a person in the car did something, it wasn't hard to notice it. The old woman tilted her head to the side and pursed her lips as if to say something to Theory. His gaze interrupted her, though. He sharpened his glare on her innocent stare. Fire welled from his eye, daring her to say something. As they sat, locked in an uncomfortable situation, Theory let that fire extinguish itself. Now was a cold and pressing chill emanating from the young man. The car got darker, and the chill spread from his eyes and into the lady's bones. Moments of darkness were intensified and covered Theory's face in brief intermissions. It was in the pause of one of those flashes of shadows that the lady was frightened by the terror of a glimpse of the door to the room. Theory had not let it out, but he'd simply set her on its step. In that moment, she was terrified by a vision of Theory's face replaced by some horse skull, garnished in dark etchings and wilted flowers. Its maw opened and rasped cold, haunting breaths. An otherworldly shriek came from him before snapping reality back to attention. He now sat in the seat, lowering his body between his knees, glaring upwards and gritting his teeth. In the darkness behind the woman crept an odd creature, an oil-covered shade with the head of a horse. It crawled along the roof of the train car and coiled itself around the air around the woman. Mind your own business, steamed Theory. The monster's mouth opened wide, obscuring her vision. The woman froze in horror before a flash of darkness covered her sight. Everything went back to normal again. This time, Theory was gone. He'd moved down to the corner of the train car and rested his head against the cold padding of the seat next to the wall. He completely ignored the woman from that point on. This kept the rest of the subway ride from being much more awkward than it had already become. Theory worked for a large record supply store on the Upper East End called 1020 as a supply manager. Most of his time at work was spent either in the back, counting through endless records or accompanying documents, or scanning the shelves to help customers find obscure titles. He worked with two other people who, when compared to the antisocial Theory, were actually not so out of the ordinary. When compared to anyone else, though, they might be considered outcasts. One of these people, Draven, was an awkwardly social-aware black activist who found himself often biting his tongue at work. He and Theory found themselves a bit closer because of both of their parents having gifted them with names they often had to explain. Their workplace friendship wasn't anything special, though. It kept them abreast of being awkwardly alone during lunch breaks, and it also made it easier to alert each other about funny situations around the stores they happened. Most of their fun came from petty interactions with customers and unforeseen issues coming up during work. Today, when Theory arrived at work, he was caught off guard by Draven and his manager, Trisha, moving some new product onto the shelves. Theory was huddled into his thick cotton hoodie, shoulders tense and his teeth clenched in a frigid chatter. He summoned his hands from his pockets and tried to pry his warming legs from himself to place them on the coat rack as he got near the counter. Boy, I wish you could have gotten here earlier. You know I don't like doing all this sorting, chuckled Latricia. She clambered through the pile of new records and other merchandise as she made her way to her coffee at the counter. Theory glanced over to the computer as he began to clock in. Why are you two here so early? His face was halfway between question and sarcasm. We got some new stuff in this morning. He called me and said the shipment was coming earlier than what they scheduled before. Theory could tell this was a headache. He was glad he avoided it. He walked over to the coffee maker, pouring his own cup before moving over to the pile of new merchandise. He looked over it as if it were a small mountain. He was a giant. He shook his head side to side and put his free hand on his hip before kneeling down to examine the task. Draven, he called without looking over to his coworker. Draven paused and laughed. Damn, you look rough in the morning. The comment forced Theory to look up and smirk. Bitch, I don't need this from you. At least not this early in the morning. They both chuckled, going off to other aisles and rooms with their work. As they each moved through their morning tasks, Theory nursed his cup of coffee with small sips and pauses of his nose and lips above the rim. Draven at one time watched in amusement as Theory reached over to his cup of coffee to warm his hands up. Draven studied the cup, watching in confusion as Theory seemed to do everything else to the cup of coffee but drink it. He noticed that Theory hadn't added any of the flavored sweetener or creamer. Perhaps he was just using it as a hand warmer, some kind of utility aromatic. Draven chuckled before he pointed Theory over to the stack of CDs that needed to be put on a cart and moved to the corner of the store. They passed a glance that showed a silent raffle for who would be the one to do it. A raising of the eyebrow from Draven was met by Theory, scrunching the corner of his mouth. Draven pointed down to a box of discs that he was already sorting and putting away. Theory conceded to the new task and stomped off to the other part of the store. Draven chuckled again before resuming the task he'd already begun. Theory moved the CDs onto the cart in small stacks, glancing at a few titles between handfuls. He found himself gazing intermittently at a long mirror that hung in the corner. At first, his glance was used to pick out the imperfections of the morning. Still tired eyes, ruffled hair. His concentration was split between his task and the mirror. As he worked, he noticed demons and the imps escaping from the room, playing around the store. They hid and teased the young man, leaving trailing giggles in the air as he grumbled in annoyance. There was one imp in particular, a red-bellied beast with long fingers and hooked nails that raked its claws against the carpet before pointing up towards the television. Latricia had the remote in hand, turning the station to the morning news. For the first few moments, the news was a jumble of arbitrary information that Theory filtered out of his head. Just as he had begun to return to work, the news anchor began talking about an insurance agency in town, Truman and Wells, doing some sort of charity drive for the holidays. The imp began to cackle, tearing his jagged nails into the carpet again before rolling his plump body behind a rack of shirts. There was a man from the company talking now. His painted smile and cheap suit called Theory's attention back to the screen. This man was the head of the HR department of Truman and Wells, Jeremy Fogel. Fogel was a name that Theory recognized. He was on his list. Work was hard for Theory for the rest of the day. He couldn't keep his mind off that man. His brain coiled in his skull, calling forth the darkest tortures as he imagined them. He could feel the imps from the room, cackling in his head, competing for space next to his violent thoughts. There was no more obvious sign of his discomfort than when he had to deal with a difficult customer, a woman named Sally, smelling of her small pets and gaudy perfume with her bold haircut. She noticed that Theory was having trouble finding a few discs that she was looking for, and she didn't think that he was moving fast enough. Theory glanced over the horizon at the computer with a harsh look, and when the woman was a bit too pushy, he knew what was going to happen next. He snarled in disgust, and she smacked her chubby hand on the counter to get his attention and quickly protested to talk to a manager. Theory stood tall, placing his hands on the counter and stretching his presence out into the air. The woman shivered back and had to refocus herself. "I really need to see your manager, young man." He paused before smiling. "Ma'am, I am the manager." He came from behind the desk and reached his hands out towards the woman. Again, she felt herself shiver. Something was off. "I don't see what you're looking for up here. Let me go to the back to see if I can find it." Theory used this as a chance to be alone for a while. He quickly found what the woman wanted and caught Draven by the arm. "It's your turn," he muttered as he pointed over to the front. Theory didn't even look at Draven after he directed him to the customer. He made a line for the back desk where he collapsed into the seat, throwing his head into his palms. His fingertips pushed into his scalp and his eyes, filled with fire and tears, began to burn lavender as his chest felt the weight of his fury building, stifling his breath. His glare met the wall in front of him, and he felt his mind calm to a screeching halt. He began searching for answers to a new puzzle. How would he get his hands on Jeremy Vogel? That question persisted through the rest of the day. It even found itself monopolizing thought space when they had an end of the shift meeting. He kept good notes on everything he was supposed to order, allowing him to put work on the back burner. He was fully invested in murdering his target. Theory needed to think. He elected to walk home instead of taking the subway. The smell of the city air revitalized him. Elmwood was a strange city. It was a spiraling, sprawling place, surrounded by dense foliage. The trees permeated the city in decorated blocks and parks. During this time of the year, most of those trees started to turn for the fall. On an aesthetic level, Theory enjoyed the color this provided the city. It gave him a sort of somber energy that accentuated his calculating attitude. By the time he got home, the sun had begun to set and let the buildings borrow its crimson hue. Theory basked in it, letting it tint his eyes. The last touches of the sun's generous warmth stretched out along the skin that had been revealed through his coat and other warming layers. He shuddered from the heat escaping his clothes and went inside. Aiden was already there, cooking their dinner as a favor for Theory's long day at work and the walk home. He was behind the island of the kitchen, bare-chested and in his underwear. He had also put on a movie in the background. It was something in black and white with older, suspenseful music. Aiden was keeping himself focused on cooking and presenting something kind of special tonight. Theory opened the door and started the drama. It began when he seemed to ignore Aiden, the movie, and the smell of the food as he stormed back to his study room. The door slammed behind him, and an air of confusion set down over the rest of the apartment. Aiden was awestruck. He wondered what was going on that made Theory ignore everything around him. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but it didn't make it any better. Aiden cautiously glared across the room at the door of Theory's special study. He had only ever seen the inside of it once. It was always dark and off limits to the outside world. Even Aiden received a special type of scorn when he ventured too close to it. On one occasion, in which he was able to get a look inside, he noticed that there were a lot of newspapers and notes pinned to the walls. There were so many papers and articles on the walls that Aiden wasn't able to tell the color of the paint from the shallow angles he had of the room. Aiden crept across the room now, fully focused on the talk that he believed would ensue from him being there. He was so focused on the door to that room that he didn't even notice to place his stirring spoon down before going to talk. Each step closer brought him more anxiety. He could never find himself, especially recently, forgetting the man whom he was partnered with. Each step brought his heart rate up. Images of horrors and demons arranged themselves in the darkness of his mind before he imagined the final horror of the spaces of their apartment. Theory was this horror, and he was a monster. Aiden was in a dangerous company, and he had to behave as such. His hand stretched out to touch the handle of the door. Static flung itself from the handle to his fingers. His heart rate climbed again, and he started to feel the heat of his anxiety culminate into perspiration above his brow. He took this as a warning of sorts, turning away to go back to his cooking. Halfway back to the stove, he heard the door open behind him. Theory emerged from the room, demonically casting a gaze deep into the air that sent a chill down his spine. He could feel those wrath-filled eyes planting on the back of his head. It was so uncomfortable. His body froze in place and then jump-started again in an effort to escape. Theory caught up to him, passing him and leaving without a word. Aiden didn't have to ask. He knew Theory was going to kill someone again tonight.